Well, now just 6 days left until Election Day. The Secretary of State's office shows more than 18,000 people have already voted early in person in Cass County.
Today, Valley News Team's Ethan Kramer talked with North Dakota Secretary of State about how secure are North Dakota elections.
Races for governor, Senate, House, and of course the presidency are just a few choices people will be making come November 5th. Now, as you make your vote, you may be wondering, are North Dakota elections secure?
Absolutely. The North Dakota legislature has been very proactive in implementing election integrity measures, really long before election integrity was cool.
Secretary of State Michael Howe held high praise for North Dakota elections. So you may be wondering what they are doing to keep elections secure.
We utilize paper ballots in the state of North Dakota. Our paper ballot tabulators have no internet connection whatsoever. We have a voter ID law. So there's a lot of common sense things in North Dakota state law.
Secretary Howe says historically the state sees high voter turnout for the race for president.
Historically, for presidential elections in North Dakota, we average 63% statewide turnout. We're already approaching 15% turnout a week before the election. So we're going to have a higher above average turnout for this election.
In 2020, there were questions about the results. Secretary Howe says what you're hearing in other states is not how North Dakota conducts their elections.
But that's probably the biggest thing as we enter the final week of the election and then the days after, to keep that in mind. What you may hear in another state may not and probably doesn't apply to how North Dakota conducts our election.
In Fargo, Ethan Kramer, Valley News Live.